All right, so I am here uh, in the debate series with now the second person, if you could call my YouTube channel a debate series. So I am here. Oh wait, this is the debate series. Okay, sorry, I had the YouTube box open and then I just heard myself. It was very disturbing. But so typically on my YouTube channel, what I like to do is talk to people that I feel like have something to say that I want to learn something from. So I have here Ben Burgis, Logic for the Left author, fellow Zero Books author. And I came across a clip of him a couple months ago. This is like a very sort of during the what was it the Mexico Peterson presentation, or it wasn't Mexico.
It wasn't Mexico. It wasn't the Peterson thing. Well, sort of it was, but it was a conference in Mexico City for the associated with Matt McManus's book on postmodern conservatism. And so I gave a talk there called public philosophy, so something like reasoning in public philosophy in the era of postmodern conservatism, where I did beat up on Peterson a fair amount as an example. And in the course of that, in the last part, when I was talking about how the left can kind of orient ourselves and present ourselves to respond to this challenge, I had I found some T-shirt that I put on a slide that was like, "Sorry, Dad, I'm a fully automated space gay luxury communist," and I made fun of that a little bit. And so I think you saw that clip and you said, "I am outraged, sir. I challenge you to a debate." And that's the base. And what I've said since then when we've talked about it is that I'm not actually 100% sure how much of a debate it's going to be, because I think, but I think it might at least be an interesting discussion, because at least by actually drawing all this out, we'll find out how much we actually do disagree about.
Yeah. So let's get right into it in terms of, before we examine the concepts on their own, sort of their Platonic forms, I don't know, sort of what they have right now. So I wanted to read this from Fully Automated Luxury Communism, the Bastani book. I hope I'm saying that right. Mm-hmm. We must understand that appropriate forms of political organization, just like the utopias we construct, are contingent on the times in which we live. Just as Falk is appropriate for a world where technology leaves us on the cusp of previously unthinkable abundance, the party form which emerged in response to closed, underdeveloped societies makes increasingly little sense. So he's already in this paragraph saying party forms need to be abolished or their current form is totally off. Then he says the same is true for forms of worker organizing, radical or reformist, which are erroneously premised on the society of work enduring forever. That society will not endure, nor should that be our political ambition. The role of the labor movement is to liberate the working class and therefore all of society, not save a broken system which is passing away. So you have any impressions about that?
Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. I've read some of Bastani's book. I haven't finished it. And I guess my reaction to that would depend on what he means about when whether it's that like labor unions would become an irrelevant form of organizing given something like Falk actually coming about, right? Which I suppose is right. Or whether that's supposed to have any consequences for how we're organizing right now, right? So,
I really wonder if a type of trade society or a non-trade society where nobody is providing any service that can be traded for is really where fully automated luxury communism, if you take the Star Trek Utopia concept, if that's really the place to go.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure what it would mean to say that nobody has any sort of service that you could trade for. I mean, I think so. How I've always understood the notion of fully automated luxury communism goes something like this: that and even before Bastani, just in Marx, right? That the fragment on machines from the Grundrisse, or how do you say that, and Critique of the Gotha program, chapter 1, where he basically seems to have this idea that that at some point in the future, more and more things will be automated away. This is a empirical prediction that I'm kind of a little loath to take a very strong stand about, since there are, Marx thought so, Keynes thought so, Andrew Yang thinks so, but lots of people who've disagreed, and based on past trends where people have said in the past that the robots are coming, and that maybe they did come for some things, but that that in turn opened up new horizons of human labor, and and it sort of balanced out. And I'm not sure that I have any special insight on that, but like just accepting the premise for the sake of argument that this is going to happen, right? That more and more human labor, things that are currently done by human labor, can be automated away, and not replaced, which I don't think is implausible. I think that might be true. Then I think Marx's basic insight is that if that happens while the machines are still privately owned, then that just means that most of us are redundant, and best case scenario, we're getting some sort of yang bucks, like an ancient Roman bread ration, to stop us from rioting. And worst case scenario, could get horrifically worse. Whereas if the machines are collectively owned, then as more and more things get automated away, then more of us, that more people, that we can just sort of collectively vote to give ourselves fewer hours with no loss in standard of living. I almost said wages, but then if you're really into the Critique of the Gotha program and all that stuff, you wouldn't like that, right? So there's a whole separate debate about that, right? Whether what sort of compensation.
Always got to watch yourself with leftists and in terms like wages or value.
Yeah. There's right. A whole separate debate about what how work would be compensated in an early stage socialist society, but but speaking crudely, right, that if the means of production were collectively owned and more things were automated away, we could just vote we could just vote ourselves fewer hours at the same wages. And then Marx's thought seems to be that at the end point of this process, that as less and less labor still needs to be done by human beings, and as capitalism sort of recedes into the historical rear view mirror, then and people think, and and there are cultural changes because of that, as well as the technological ones. People are less maybe are less motivated by compensation because they grew up in a society where where that wasn't dog eat dog the way that capitalism is. Then eventually whatever little work still needed to be done by human beings, which would probably mostly be intellectual labor in any case, would just sort of wouldn't need to be compensated. It would just sort of get done as a matter of it would just sort of get done because everybody was pursuing the projects that interested them, and just for their own sake. And for some of us that would mean writing bad novels or whatever, but for some people, what really turns them on creatively is coming up with little engineering fixes or whatever. And so whatever work still needed to be done by humans would just kind of get done. and there would be so much material abundance that we wouldn't have to worry about. We wouldn't, like, the whole sort of issue of equal or unequal distribution would just sort of become moot because there would be so much to go around that everybody could just kind of take what they needed.
I wonder if trade would just spring up like a, like the acceleration of, say, like a mushroom. Just if you in that sort of environment where there's such high technology, and everybody has all this free time, even if currency was somehow abolished, or if you somehow abolished currency, whether or not people would be able to contain themselves, or they would find something to trade, and they would recreate markets within any sort of system like this, which would then recreate the
I'm always kind of confused when I hear people raise this worry, because, well, okay, for one thing, there have been markets for like most of human history that, like, it severely predates capitalism, right? So even if you do have some sort of market, that doesn't mean you have capitalism. And exchange certainly dramatically precedes even markets, right? Like, you could have all sorts of societies, like, gift economies, or like, if you read like Dave Graeber's Debt, first 5,000 years, has all kinds of weird examples of types of early societies and how exchange worked. And even within current society, we have lots of forms of exchange that don't just sort of become markets. So it seems to me that if everything I just described happened, right, which is a big if, but like, if that all did happen, I don't know, like, some people seem like really weird, like I keep running into people, I feel like, who have these views that are like, well, if you'll sort of allow anybody to, like, to like engage in any sort of trade ever, right? Like, I'll give you my, I have this like old first edition book that that you'd like, but I'll give it to you if you make me dinner tomorrow. Then, like, that's like the original, that's like original sin, and it'll just
process of capital, of course.
It'll develop back into capitalism.
Yeah,
and that seems like a really weird view, especially for communists to have, because that's sort of the libertarian view of capitalism, that, like, it's just sort of the natural byproduct of, like, people being allowed to exchange things. Whereas I would think that if you're any kind of socialist, you think that it's you think capitalism is this, like, extremely historically specific contingent thing that arose under very specific circumstances. And it's not just this sort of poisonous mushroom that can, like, spring up anywhere, as long as.
Well, maybe I am a little, libertarian in that sense. Just the idea of people buying something for less, selling it for more, and accumulating whatever currency is developed. I only say that.
Okay, but I mean, I do want to point out there's already a jump between, like, exchange and currency, right? Those were already two very different things. Yeah,
but I guess my thought, you could call it a naturalistic fallacy, and if it is a fallacy, it's entirely possible. But I just see all around me, and of course this is very un-Hegelian, I see all around me, which of course you shouldn't, that's not how you should, but is people doing that in low-income neighborhoods, especially, or when there's someone wants supplementary goods, or they want, they're living at a certain level and they want to live at a better level. They're not necessarily like illegal things, but like just for instance, like pies, like they'll figure out a way to get pies for half price, and then they'll sell it, and they'll make like a couple $100 extra. And they'll accumulate the currency in order to buy something else. And I sort of
well, that's an interesting example, though. Let's pause on that one, because like, that sort of thing strikes me as something that's a lot more likely to go on in, as you say, low-income neighborhoods, where everybody, like there's this massive material incentive to sort of, come up with like just any which way that you can think of to try to like build up, any kind of resources. Whereas like I think if you I think that even within a capitalist society, right, you're much less likely to kind of get that sort of like really individualistic kind of like one-on-one kind of primitive accumulation within the neighborhood, in places where people are just more materially comfortable, right? They just don't have as much of incentive, to do stuff like that. And I think if if fully automated luxury communism means anything, then it would presumably be a society where everybody at least has the level of material comfort that whatever like middle class people have, in the current society. I mean, like that's actually a pretty low bar for luxury. So I would think then that like I'd be much less worried about like, because look, I mean, like it's entirely. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of our tendency to like trade things and make exchanges is cultural and how much of it is biological or whatever. But like even if it is, even if that is something that would like linger on forever, like I think the sort of like casual interpersonal trades that people, that people are going to make when they're not really worried about money, right? Like they just like, oh, you have this thing I want or whatever. Like, I think seem a lot less likely to sort of balloon into what you're talking about than the sort of, than like the kind of, like, I mean, look, I mean, it's like, like already in the society that we live in, right? Like if you're, if you're like a middle class person, right, you'll drive right past the yard with this bunch of unguarded copper wire, right, because you don't have that much of an incentive to like get out and and cut it up and sell it, where so I'm much less moved by that worry. I mean, I think my bigger concern about about Falk isn't even that I don't necessarily think that it would happen. Maybe it would. I mean, I'm not. I feel like I don't quite understand like certainty about it, right? Like there's this like, oh, this is definitely how things are going to shake out. I think that.
That's why the fully automated piece I feel like is the first thing to critique in terms of what gets automated, and it's such a part of the right accelerationist sphere. Which is that
you probably know a lot more about right accelerationism than I do. So tell me about this.
The whole idea is that eventually general intelligence will come about, and humans will sort of evolve in terms of they will die, and AI will be born as sort of. But interestingly enough, there's so many contradictions in right-wing theory, and I think that must be like imminent to it sometimes. But for some reason they want like very specific things before that happens. They want like, so it's like if they have this prophecy, oh, tomorrow will take care of itself. Oh, but I really kind of am just going to support this right-wing populist politician, which will somehow help. So it sort of doesn't make too much sense. But I've always been of the.
So just obvious question, like so I mean, this is something I've vaguely heard people talk about for a while, but I don't know anything about this, right? So these are going to be very basic questions, right? So like I know what like I know what accelerationism means in the context of debates about left strategy. Where like that, where accelerationism roughly means like you want things to get worse so they'll get better, right? That you think like if Trump beats Hillary Clinton, then that'll like radicalize people, and that'll make it more likely that we'll get left-wing things down the line. But then I'm trying to like see like, okay, how would this apply to what you're talking about? And so like, do right-wing accelerationists want the AIs to come and like develop and make humans extinct, or
yeah, it's pretty much. That's like it's an undercurrent in all
why?
the discussions. I think maybe part of them knows it's very far away or not going to happen. I have to think that I don't understand.
I mean, like, why would that be a good thing from their perspective?
Because believing in evolutionary of humans, so they have a sort of racial ideology of human evolution and the classic sort of Nazi-esque tropes and all that. And then they believe that the next step of that, of course, is not the master race, but rather AI, right? But I've always been of the
like evil, but I mean, that's a sort of weirdly charming point of view. Okay,
and that's see, they'll get you like that. That's how they get you. But really, I'm a Hegelian in the sense that insofar as something is relevant in terms of politics, it has to be relevant to mankind to some extent. Even if you look at nature, nature still holds a place in the big other to some, and we sort of want nature to not be destroyed in various forms. So I don't really believe in giving birth to AI. I also don't think it's possible. I think they don't understand, you know, what intelligence really is, because, you know, the algorithm errors are, you know, they're sorting, you know, sorting algorithms, and then they figure out sort of what to say. I'm not sure that that's all. So being a human is necessarily.
So you're like skeptical about hard AI, like strong AI.
Yeah. Also, we're such a conglomeration of lots of things. I have lots of. This is sort of a little off topic, but in terms of AI, like we have so many glands and receptors and chemicals that are, you know, how Kant talks about the unity, the synthetic unity to some extent. Our unity, you know, AI will just be like a software program. So I feel like we don't quite get the stuff that makes us conscious in terms of, I think it would be interesting to see people try to reproduce chemical reactions like computationally, like glands, like a computer with glands or something like that. Because to try to really recreate general intelligence, I think you'll have to recreate our sort of juices, you might say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's my mad scientist theory.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Yeah, it's probably. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking like there's a class, there's a paper. You probably read it. It's like from the big early '90s by Werner Vinge, called like the what was it? How to Survive the Coming Technological Singularity, where he talks about different like paths to artificial intelligence, and some of them do kind of take into account the sorts of things you're talking about, since he says like he talks about like just like literally like physically recreating human brains, and like, you know, but like with like vastly greater processing speeds, or like somehow hooked into to digital networks. And so you know, there might, you know, not that I'm, you know, I'm a lot less enthusiastic about the prospect of human extinction, you know, than the people you're talking about. I like, you know, I like people and would like them to continue to exist and all that, but I don't know that there's necessarily insoluble problems. But look, as far as the left wing version of all this, I mean, I guess I'll just put my cards on the table as far as my own position. Like, I think that like I'm very sympathetic on like a normative level to like what I take, you know, Marx to have been talking about with regards to all this stuff, and which I think, right, from what I've read of Bastani so far, I think Bastani is just like filling in a lot of technological details. I think the underlying thinking is very similar, from what I can tell. So I'm very sympathetic to it normatively. I just think it's, and I think that we should, and I think that it's a open empirical question whether we can get all the way there. I certainly think that it should be at least like kind of a regulative ideal, right? It's like I think that partially automated, somewhat luxurious, communism, is certainly something we can shoot for, to be less playful about that and more specific, right? Like, I mean, I think that, I do think that a great advantage of collective ownership, of the means of production, distribution, exchange, is that we could respond to automation by voting ourselves fewer hours, and even if this doesn't, even if it never reaches quite the end point, right, that Marx seems to have in mind, and in the Fragment of Machines, or in the Critique of the Gotha program, where he, because really the only way I can make sense of that idea that we would really have, like, from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs, right? That, like, people would just sort of, like, give as the spirit moves them and take whatever they want to, as if we had that fully automated version of communism, where we just had just unfathomable material abundance, and almost every, like 95% of what humans used to do at least was automated away. But I think even if we don't get all the way there, right, then certainly it's still probably a useful ideal to have, because it's going to, the more we can free ourselves, like socialism in that really basic way is like freedom from this sort of unjust hierarchy imposed on us by capitalism, right? Freedom from capitalist exploitation. But there's still, but I mean, as far as we can tell, from evidence from existing workers' cooperatives, and just from, like, being realistic about this, right? Like, just because we had a democratic form of social organization, that doesn't mean that, like, work wouldn't still suck. I mean, of course it would. It would suck less, right? But it would still suck, right? Because you'd still be, as long as you're working for, honestly, whether we're talking about wages, or some sort of labor time vouchers, or the, like, Paracon thing where you'd get where, like, you have, like, work commitments that some sort of, like, committee, workers committees and consumer federation committees, like, decide what work commitments are, get you what withdrawals, from consumer goods, at the end of it. Whichever one of those things you had, you're still primarily motivated to work by some kind of hope of exchange in the future.
Yeah. So what happens on that note?
And anyway, just to complete the thought, that would still suck, right? Because you'd still have alienated time, right? You'd still be doing tasks that you wouldn't choose for yourself, so you could get these consumer goods at the other end. And so, even if we don't get all the way to Falk, I think that, like, reducing the amount of time that we have to spend on tasks we wouldn't have chosen for ourselves is absolutely a worthwhile goal. But you were holding up your Pellegrino, and it sounded like it was going to be good. So what were you going to say?
Speaking of motive, Ben, what do we do about all the motive for luxury brands, and how do you have luxury in communism in a way that's not totally just a blasphemous mess? Would be the question.
Yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, I guess it depends on, what we mean. I think that, like, any kind of, like, really planned economy, like really planned, so, like, no elements of, like, market socialist competition between, public or worker controlled firms or whatever. But like a truly planned economy would presumably not have brand names, which is like half of what,
That's half of the U.S. identity. But sorry,
no, it is half of the U.S. identity, and it's certainly half of what makes certain things seem luxurious to us, right? That we don't sort of say,
certainly,
like the idea that it's that there are certain super specific brands of things that we know are the better ones, right? Is a big part of how that works. So presumably, if we're imagining like a radical enough kind of socialist rupture that we're even asking questions about whether it counts as fully automated luxury communism and stuff, then presumably that part is gone, right? It wouldn't be luxury in the sense that it were like certain sort of specific brands that had a mystique because they were so expensive. It would just be luxury in the sense that your feet are up and you're and even if the champagne doesn't have a brand, like you're drinking some sort of champagne, and
Yeah. So Jane said at 9:57, you can't automate a subject which consists of largely qualitative properties. There is a lot of unknown example. We can replicate DNA, but we don't fully understand why some genes are activated, others are not. I'm interested in that first statement. You can't automate a subject which consists of largely qualitative properties. I mean, I imagine I'm trying to figure out why not.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I guess I wonder if what she's thinking of is something like is something like the traveling salesman problem in computer science, where you take these like really simple, like these things that don't even look like they should be very mathematically complex, like a traveling salesman needs to visit these 20 cities, right? What's the most efficient like order for him to do it in? And like when you hear something like that, you think, oh well, whatever. I mean, this is just like this sounds like it shouldn't even be like a hard algebra problem or whatever, but like it turns out that the most sophisticated algorithms that we can come up with, they will eventually give you an answer, but it just takes this like totally absurd amount of time for them to do it. And humans are much better at this, not because we can come up with the exact right answer faster than the computer can. We in fact, we can't come up with the exact right answer at all, right? It's too, it turns out that like when you look at it algorithmically, it's like way too complicated for us. But rather because humans are much better at like sort of, getting a like seeing like, okay, this is what would be like a good enough answer, right? That like we don't really know yet how to program computers to sort of generate the good enough answer.
Yeah, either exact or totally the plain, or Gandhi's at 99 irritability for, you've heard of that hack, that sort of civilization hack where Gandhi's like very peaceful. So if you do one thing and it goes negative, but the machine resets. So then he's the most violent person in the game to 99. So then you get violent Gandhi who nukes everything. Yeah, algorithms don't really have a gray zone in that sense.
Yeah, and so it could be that like, and I mean, I guess the second part of Jane's statement was something about cases where like we kind of understand what process might give rise to something, but we don't understand quite how the process works. And fair enough. I mean, I guess I guess if the thought is something like, certain kinds of human creativity can't be automated because in order to automate them, we'd have to understand way more about how they work than we're likely to, to figure out anytime soon. that might be true. But then I guess, well, even if that is true, even if there aren't any workarounds on it, which I'm not sure there are, but then I guess it just depends how fully we need that fully to be, right? Like it might not be fully, right? It might just.
Can you automate psychoanalysis for my viewers? Will you fully automate psychoanalysis?
Yeah, no problem. You just you could probably do that in like a like the version of BASIC they had in the mid 90s. You just like if line 10 patient says anything, line 20 say tell me more.
Tell me more. Oh man, if only you knew, dude. There's some interesting things like.
How do you feel about that?
Well,
how does that make you feel?
Well, now you're a CBT therapist. See, I think they already do automate CBT therapy. Actually, they have computerized CBT. Thoughts, feelings, and what did you think at that time, and then what did you do, and then how did you feel, right? versus the Lacanian thing, which is what I was sort of hoping, which is sort of how we go through things, even not therapeutically, but via the signifiers, and then.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, psychoanalysis, maybe not, but like probably other kinds of medicine, right? Like just sort of doing what what a general practitioner does or whatever, you could for sure automate that. Like, in fact, it would probably do a better job, probably literally do a better job just in terms of diagnosing things, right? Because what the human doctor does is sort of associate symptoms with their knowledge of diseases and their experience, but the automated version would just have like a much bigger database to draw on, and probably be like have a lot fewer of the biases that throw off human practitioners. And then this gets back to the point about how much needs to be fully automated, what fully needs to be in, right? Because
I know that doctors currently they don't have the general practitioners, but in terms of like, is this cancer, they're very good at. Algorithms.
So right, totally. So like, and then the question is, because I mean, one way, one relatively optimistic way of looking at this is, you don't need to have fully automated luxury communism in the sense of there's so much abundance and there's so much has been automated that that we don't need, people don't need to work for exchange anymore, right? That we could, like if that's the sort of fundamental goal, that you don't need those exchange incentives for work anymore, then you don't need to have full automation for that. What you need to do is you need to automate away all the stuff that people don't enjoy doing, and then it could be that, like, let's say you can't automate away Lacanian psychoanalysis. That's okay, because presumably, if everybody was just sort of like, pursuing the projects that interested them for their own sake, right? Like some people, I mean, look, I'm sure there are right now Lacanian psychoanalysis who come from like families with lots of money who don't need to work, right? But who are just like super intellectually interested in.
Sure. I met that phenomenon, that therapist phenomenon, when I had a supervisor once, and they were like, "Yeah, I did a marriage family therapist," and then I inherited this, very nice. I was like, "This is a very nice house." I was like, I had that thought. I was like, someone whose therapy is a hobby.
Yeah. So it's like, and compare, right? Like nobody has ever like gotten a job at McDonald's as a hobby, right? Like nobody's flipping burgers just because like they think it's like a fun thing to do, and they they don't need the money. Nobody's ever gotten a job at a factory You know,
Ben, yeah, and Ben, because I work in South Central like 8 hours every day during the week. Like the difference between the frame of reference that we're working with and a lot of people who people who work at the place I work at, not even just patients, whose families, they have like two siblings, one sibling in a gang, one's on drugs, and then they're like, yeah, I'm gonna get a job, and I'm going to like figure this out. And like you see a lot of people that, because the entry to like trade school or college is so high, and I guess the loan idea just is so unappealing to a lot of people. It just becomes you have so many people that are working those fast food jobs that are like, okay, now I have this fast food job, and I avoided getting shot. I avoided this thing that my brother did, and this thing that my sister did, and here I am. I'm like working. It's like, thank God I have a McDonald's job.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, McDonald's is so fucked up, by the way, what they do.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, because I've seen people that work at McDonald's as clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. like nobody is. Yeah, like I remember a couple of years ago getting into this big argument with this girl I went to grad school with, who's kind of a libertarian, and she and she like posted this thing about like one of those memes. They're like, you want a $15 minimum wage? Well, here's your replacement. And it was like the automatic order kiosk at McDonald's. And
they have those in Hong Kong. They still have chefs. They still have people that ring you up, and they have the kiosks.
So we were talking about this, and what I thought was like the funniest part of the argument was that like she and like one of her libertarian friends were like, oh, okay, we don't want this like high minimum wage, but like we'd support like a UBI. I was like, well, hold on, if you have a UBI that's like actually enough to provide a basic income, then McDonald's is going to have to start paying a hell of a lot more than $15 to get anybody to work there, right? Like that's not, because it's awful, right? Like it's and there's this weird thing that right wingers do where they pretend where they have this like faux populist thing, that it's like, oh, I don't look down on this job or whatever. It's like, no, it's awful. Nobody would do this if they really had options, right? Like this, it's you. Like you don't have a moment, to yourself, for like throughout the shift that you're on. They can control if you're facing customers, whether you're smiling at a given time, whether you're going to the bathroom, you smell like grease. Like that's like nobody who works at like sure.
No one would volunteer there.
Yeah, nobody is going to volunteer at McDonald's. So, which bringing back to the point, right? That like so I think to have fully automated luxury communism, you would absolutely need to automate away burger flipping, because nobody's going to do that as a volunteer. You don't necessarily need to automate away architecture, Lacanian psychoanalysis, because people might still volunteer to do those things.
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting phenomenon in terms of just like going from zero to any sort of socialism within sort of my sphere of where I work, because we try to unionize, and they found out early and did a bunch of illegal things to bust the union. Then they lost the labor board case, and then still like in contact every time they do something a little shady, like, hey, does that break the labor board settlement? But there was, everybody sort of is in a better position in terms of their pay is better, or they left and they're getting better pay. There was one person who they left and then they started working 7 days a week, and I felt really bad about that. But I was really happy to find that they recently found employment in Santa Monica, in a place but it's in Santa Monica, which is a very sort of ritzy, it's like a tourist place in Los Angeles. So it's like the west side, right by the beach. South LA is like, you're not by the beach, you're by the freeway. There's like a few main cross streets that that sort of determine, are you sort of further south? Are you sort of are you like Compton area? Are you down below downtown? Are you in downtown? And then there are different sort of vertical axes that determine. So you get these different neighborhoods. But then, you know, a lot of people who were working there, you know, they weren't very politically active, but then they started getting involved in the union. They had a lot of complaints, and I said, we should unionize. Why don't we unionize? And so we ended up. Doug Lane asked, "Did you get the new tripod, Ben?" Anyway,
I actually did get it. You did get that in the mail yesterday. You can tell him.
Yeah, there you go. But they started working in Santa Monica from South LA, and they live and work in South LA. And they said, you know what I realized? It's like we're fucking poor in terms of, not like really, but in terms of resources given to something in Santa Monica. Like Bezos donated $1 million, and they were talking about how in there they were like, yeah, well, he donates $1 million, but it's like a tax write-off. And then we had a conversation like, yeah, no one makes $1 billion. You take $1 billion from like AOC. That was good. Isn't she good? She's good. Yeah. Yeah, so it's very interesting to see a lot of people go from not very politically active to be like, why is this accumulated here in the city, but not here in the city?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's capitalism. You know, the tendency to accumulate and hold on to of capital, essentially. In the
yeah, no, absolutely. You know, several years back, you know, when I was working as a substitute teacher, you know, before I got the job at Rutgers, that was just in mid Michigan. But like, since the way it works, because they've of course at this point subcontracted all that out to a private company, so it's not rigidly tied to school districts. So, you know, you can like register with this company to be a sub in like a couple different school districts in the same area, and it's a pretty, which means that like it's a pretty dramatic experience of income inequality, because like you might, you know, because if that essentially lets you be a substitute teacher in anywhere that's like an easy, you know, relatively easy driving distance, which means that like the places that you go from day to day, you know, it's night and day, right? You know, that like you really get to experience. It's like, okay, this is what schools for upper middle class people are like. You know, this is what schools for poor people are like.
Yeah,
and you don't get. It's a very, you know, it's really stark. You know, like I really wonder. I mean, maybe. Like this is like, if, you know, like I have to think that if I hadn't already been a socialist before I had this experience, you know, that might have done it, you know, just all on its own, you know, it's like, oh wow, this really like, you know, like this, you know, it's just so cartoonishly dramatic, even when it comes to this thing that's like theoretically supposed to be a public service that's the same for everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely not. And I think people don't recognize how much they avoid laws or ideas that would be so beneficial for working class people, or people sort of more on the margins, depending on the state. Like something like free trade school, like that Bernie's proposing. I got my Bernie pins on. I'm going to a Bernie event. But I had them on yesterday, so I guess that's not a good explanation. But
he's leading California, right? That's exciting.
Yeah, I'm going with some people who, I work with, the new people who see they weren't in the union, but they saw the settlement agreement, and then we started talking about the settlement agreement, and we have tea every day. So we're they said it brings harmony at home in the office. That's what the lady who sold it to me, she said, this brings harmony. And I said, perfect. So sold. Walking with you. I got this.
and I guess maybe that this actually does bring
Sorry,
us.
that's off topic. You're very anti-ADHD. I appreciate that. You're very focused. Yeah,
Well, all I was going to say, this maybe brings us full circle to why I sort of roll my eyes, even though, as I think we've established, right, I'm reasonably folk friendly, right? I think, I mean, I'm too. I mean, I guess maybe I'm too much of an empiricist or whatever to feel like we could be sure about how far that we can get in that direction. But I'm reasonably friendly to the idea. But why why I get a little itchy or tend to roll my eyes at the sort of meme version, right? You know, fully automated space gay luxury communism. It's not because I object to communism or luxury or automation
or space gays
or gayness or space travel, right? Like those are all fine things. But it does seem like there's a certain kind of instinct there to like, you know, that's like, oh, you know, I'm a communist, you know, I want to really like, you know, to sort of like brand yourself as being as different as humanly possible. To like, you know, it's like, look at how radical I am. I'm going to keep on piling on more and more adjectives. Until you can see how, you know, until you can see how fundamentally different, you know, our worldviews are. And I think that's kind of an unhealthy instinct. I think.
Yeah, but that's in terms of the legitimacy of the. Now I'm doing the logic thing. In terms of the legitimacy of fully automated luxury communism, Ben, I don't think the people who take the signifier and associate themselves vulgarly is necessarily doesn't delegitimize the concept.
No, I don't think
or does it? Or does it Hegelianly delegitimize?
No. It does not, right? I'm just very I'm interested in both questions, right? So, like, in other words, I'm interested in both. What's the best sort of, you know, what's the best, most desirable, you know, most communistic society that we could possibly organize or hope to achieve, right? That's a question that interests me.
Yeah.
But I'm also interested in the question.
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a very important question. But then, like, another question that interests me is, you know, to put it in a very capitalist way, right? You know, how do we go about selling that vision, right? You know, that is, as you just said a minute ago, there are a lot of people who aren't, you know, who don't really see how much, you know, even some like basic kind of social democratic, you know, proposals, you know, could benefit them. And I think that there's a way to say, like, there's a way to both preserve our kind of radical optimism about how far we can go, while still keeping one eye on the issue of how do we describe it to people so they'll want to go there with us, right? Because I think one entirely legitimate fear that a lot of ordinary people have is like, okay, look, I know things suck right now, right? But this is just sort of, but clearly this is, even if it sucks for me, even if I'm poor or whatever, this is like, at least we have like a functional society. And the more it sounds like you're telling people to go on a crazy leap into the unknown, right?
Yeah.
The more I think this kind of triggers this legitimate fear that, like, it's that, you know, because I think a lot of people have a not unreasonable view that just because things are bad, right, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that if we burn it all down, they'll be any better. And so I think that it's so I think that we can. I think that it's important to do both. I think it's important to both say, hey, here's how we can, here's what we can do in the next, like, here's what we know we can do, right? That there's no, that like, we know perfectly well that we could have like, democratic workplaces because like Mondragon really exists, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to speculate about this, right? We know we could have we know that we could have like nationalized healthcare because the NHS exists. We can like and we can provide people with social needs, etc. And you can like cobble this together into a social, like a vision of like a society 5 minutes after capitalism that might not be all that we've ever dreamed of, but would be a big step in the right direction. And then like, I don't think that means that we should like shut off our imaginations or that we shouldn't think about how we could improve from there. I think we should think about how we could improve from there. But like, but I think it's also worth thinking about like what foot we want to put, put first, right?
Yeah.
Like how do we kind of open people up to the idea, because like right now, I kind of think most people on some level, whether they're having a good time under capitalism or not, right? Mm-hmm. Most people on some level just believe that just believe what most medieval peasants believed about feudalism, that it's just the way things are. It's
yeah.
It's like complaining about the weather. And so I think that it's good to be like relatively grounded in how we sell the idea that we don't have to accept this, that we could do better. And I think there's a way to do that while keeping the door open to like, hey, maybe we can do even better than that someday.
Yeah, and I think you were right when you said the real question is something along the lines of what is the you didn't use this word, but what is the qualitatively highest socialist society that we can come up with? Not necessarily can we recreate this meme, which is fully automated luxury communism. And I mean, for me personally, I always saw the most interesting aspect of the accelerationist project, or the most redeemable in terms of, which is when you're keeping up with real new tendencies of capital, like platforms, and you use that, in the sort of non-democratic way, you can recapture that and sort of turn it to a tool for this other thing, which is what is the best society that we can make, socialist society that we can make, right? In terms of whether it be like a Facebook group, in terms of, which I really thought of like left acceleration as like an upside down roadmap. It's like, platform capitalism is this new tendency. It's like, I guess you can get a platform. I wonder how a normal person can get a platform.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like not even like a platform like Now I'm Heard, just like own the place where people are talking. So I think that's a very necessary component of left accelerationism, if not necessarily reproducing the whole meme, fully automated luxury communism, maybe at least just what are the trends of capital and how do we use that to make a socialist society for the future?
Yeah.
Right.
Fair enough.
Anything else? We're at an hour. You got a closing statement? Or did you make it already?
I think I basically made it. But yeah, I don't know. And this, I'd like to think that this, that we could be at a turning point here, that we could, that if we are at least about to see the launch of real American social democracy for the first time, then maybe our maybe our great grandchildren who live in luxury communism can recognize this as a.
They'll look back at all the left left book shit posting be like, this was the early days of the left accelerationist project. Like,
That's
fuck
right.
you, no, fuck you.
Yeah, no, it seems brutal to us now, but I guess this is how they had to communicate their ideas with each other back then.
Wow.
All right.
Makes you think. All right, on that note, I'm gonna hit the end broadcast.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Ollie.
Yeah.